Going to give everybody a chance to get in before we officially get started. We have started the recording for this session, so please be mindful of that. All right, looks like we've cleared the waiting room. Welcome back to our 14th annual NOLA ILC Information Literacy Forum and our 5th online conference. We're so glad everyone could make it, and we're really excited about the lineup of presentations that we have this year. My name is Megan Lowe, and I am a member of the NOLA ILC Executive Board. Our chat monitor today is the chair of the NOLA ILC Executive Board, Ariana Lonin. I'm going to take a moment to read our NOLA ILC Land Acknowledgement and Action Statement, and we're going to also drop that into the chat as well if you would like to read the longer version of that. The New Orleans Information Literacy Forum would not only like to acknowledge the original inhabitants of our land, but also provide suggestions and links for others to show support of Native communities and causes. Our policy can be found at the link that Ariana has dropped into the chat. Before we get to today's presenters, there are a couple of housekeeping matters we need to take care of. We'll have 2 presentations and 2 lightning talks today. Presentations will last for 30 minutes with 15 minutes for Q&A, and lightning talks will be 5 to 10 minutes with any time remaining left for Q&A. You can type your questions into the chat box at any time, and me or our chat monitor will keep track of them for the Q&A session afterwards. You can also use the chat box to let us know about any tech problems you think may be originating on our end. Finally, in the chat box, we'll drop a URL to our link tree, which includes links for our social media channels and the land acknowledgement and action statements and links. One final note, we'll be recording this presentation and sharing it on our YouTube channel. More details about that at the end of this session, but if you don't want anybody hearing anything you wouldn't want your mama to hear, be sure to keep your self muted and or off camera if you feel uncomfortable with that. All right, so we are recording and we are ready to move into our first presentation. Today, we're honored to welcome Melisa Balos for her presentation, Borderless Misinformation, Teaching Information Literacy Through the Lens of International Relations. So now I will turn it over to Melisa.
Good morning, everyone. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Looks good from here.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Melisa. I've actually spent the past 2 years at Morehouse School of Medicine, but I'm in the process of moving to New Orleans, actually, to work at Tulane. So I'm kind of in transit right now. But my presentation is called Borderless Misinformation, Teaching Information Literacy Through the Lens of International Relations. In a world where misinformation knows no borders, we as educators have an opportunity and a responsibility to help students critically engage with the global flow of information. Today, we'll explore how international relations, or IR, as I will call it, I know it's a little different from the librarian IR, can serve as a powerful framework for building stronger, more context-aware information literacy skills. Framing the challenge. Let's begin by framing the problem. We live in a digital ecosystem where news, opinions, and even conspiracy theories travel across the globe within seconds. But not all information is created or distributed equally. Depending on a country's political system, information may be free, censored, biased, or weaponized. In democracies, we see media influenced by political leanings, economic pressures, or corporate ownership. In authoritarian regimes, the state may tightly control narratives, suppress dissenting voices, and promote propaganda. So how can students, many of whom consume global content daily, begin to make sense of it all? That's where this workshop comes in, or presentation. Our task today is to explore how political systems influence information flow and how students can be equipped to navigate it with critical awareness. So, why IR? Why bring IR into an information literacy conversation? Because IR offers a toolkit to dissect how information operates as power. In global context, narratives don't just inform, they persuade, they mobilize, and they legitimize action. A few critical IR concepts are pretty notable for this type of inquiry. Soft power. Soft power is when countries use culture, values, or media appeal to shape global opinion without coercion. Propaganda is the deliberate shaping of information to support a political agenda, often through misinformation, sometimes disinformation. National interest frames how a country defines its priorities and thus how it shapes messaging around events or policies. And framing, which is central here, is how language, imagery, and structure influence how information is received. By bringing these tools into information literacy instruction, we help students connect the dots between what they read, who created it, and most importantly, why. Looking at the real-world relevance. During COVID-19, we saw competing narratives about the virus's origin, its severity, and vaccine legitimacy. Was it framed as a war, a hoax, a matter of national pride? With climate change, some nations elevate scientific consensus while others fund disinformation to protect economic interest. In international conflicts, we encounter conflicting reports, nationalistic rhetoric, and selective visibility. Students need more than fact-checking skills. They need to understand the broader context. Who benefits from this narrative? What geopolitical interests are at stake? How do global power dynamics shape what is emphasized, what is silenced, what is distorted? IR frameworks give us the tool to decode these complex systems of meaning, and they help students become not only critical readers, but globally literate citizens. So for this workshop, I want to focus on media literacy and COVID-19 narratives. To help students apply these ideas, I've developed a case study focused on how 4 countries, the US, the UK, or areas, China and Russia framed COVID-19 in early 2022. This could be extended if you wanted to do later on in the pandemic or whatever. This activity introduces students to how headlines, language, and images serve as tools of narrative construction. It also provides space for students to explore visual and textual evidence, compare global coverage, and begin identifying strategic communication patterns. The activity overview. The objectives here are pretty clear. Compare how national media framed COVID-19. Examine how these narratives shaped public perception. Develop comparative media literacy and IR-informed information analysis skills. Students will practice media literacy and critical thinking, analyzing tone, language, and visuals, exploring the relationship between political systems and messaging. Part of this project or case study or assignment that could be adapted is to really get students to not only critically engage with the material, but to reflect on that and what that means. The first step, gather media sources. We would begin by gathering headlines, 3 to 5 per country, one, whatever works, from diverse sources, ideally including both state-run and independent media. This sampling will offer a window into how information is curated under different systems. Suggestions include CNN, New York Times, Fox News. I put an asterisk next to Fox News, which I will discuss in the next slide. UK, this includes BBC, The Guardian, which I find has excellent climate and environment content, or The Sun, which is more of a tabloid. In China, it's Xinhua, Global Times, CGTN, Russia, it's RT, Sputnik News, TASS. One of the things you have to be careful about is what is maybe perhaps produced in the English versions of the Chinese and Russian news sites or media sites will not necessarily be the same as what is produced in their own language. I know that when I do Turkish stuff, the information I find on the Daily Sabah, which is the English version of a newspaper, is a little different from what you'd get if you read it in actual Turkish. So I'm just going to go briefly into why you shouldn't or could not or can't ignore Fox News. Fox News plays a significant role, unfortunately, in the American information ecosystem. It has a broad audience and proven influence over public opinion, especially in conservative circles. Ignoring it would be a disservice to understanding media literacy in context. We must examine its widespread reach, documented misinformation, role as a gateway to further right platforms, political and civic impact. This isn't about targeting one outlet unfairly. It's about equipping students to analyze the mechanisms by which powerful media shape discourse and belief. If you can kind of see in the background, I chose 1 week to see what the 5 or the 10 most on Nielsen, their rating system. And unfortunately, they all come from Fox News Channel. About 13 years ago, I started teaching writing at Florida International University. And one of the things I had my students engage with was different news sites. And one of the things I would caution them and say that I would not accept any writing that included information from Fox News. And I think that was a discredit to my students to be able to necessarily not use that as credible or legitimate evidence, but to engage with this kind of information in general. What's worse and what made me more concerned and made me kind of open up my own horizons is that as years went by, my students started distrusting almost everything, right? I know CNN is sensationalist, but it's not necessarily inaccurate, right? It's an unfortunate byproduct of the 24-hour news cycle where you have these kind of sensationalist claims. But I started to see that my students were disregarding all information. And as social media became more potent and more powerful, that kind of replaced where they consumed most of their information, right? And so that's why ignoring things like Fox News is more dangerous than anything, because coming to a more common ground is essential. Their reach is so widespread that to ignore it kind of shuts down other conversations and potential discourse. The next step in the assignment would be to analyze headlines and language, right? Next, we want to dive into the language itself. What tone does the headline convey? Who's blamed? What metaphors are used? Is there a call to unity or a strategy of fear? In this part of the assignment, we would ask students to reflect on whether the language fosters trust or skepticism, action or paralysis, and to think critically about why certain emotional appeals are used over others. So this is a sample comparison table, right? It would be a template that they could use in their in their activity. So for the US, we might potentially examine a headline like Trump's Churchillian bluster won't defeat this enemy. This uses war metaphors, irony, and historical references to frame the administration's response as performative and ineffective. In the UK, headlines like coronavirus outbreak could leave 1 in 10 in hospital, convey alarm using clinical bureaucratic language. The blame is more on institutional delay than individual leaders. In China, Xi vows to win people's war against novel coronavirus, frames a pandemic as a patriotic mission with collectivist language and an emphasis on unity. In Russia, RT's Worldwide Panic and Uncertainty, Your Survival Guide to Quarantine, uses advisory language with emotional appeal, positioning panic as a Western problem and downplaying state accountability. I will note that all four of these are real articles, and the RT, the Russian RT article, can only be accessed through the Time Machine. The third step in this assignment is to analyze visuals. Visuals, particularly today and with the potency of social media like Instagram or TikTok, are just as powerful as words. So in this, we would ask students, who is shown in the image? What emotions are evoked? Are the color tones calming or urgent? What messages do protective gear, hospital settings, or crowds send? Visual cues shape perception, sometimes more than headlines do. We want students to read images critically, just as they would a text. So these are pandemic optics, and these are a tale of two strategies. It's a stark example in these two photos. In the US, we saw headlines praising political rallies like Trump touts large crowd in Waterford, despite rising case numbers. The visuals often showed energetic, maskless crowds sending mixed signals about public health. In contrast, China's state media featured Xi in a clean clinical setting, often surrounded by masked medical staff, reinforcing order, control, and leadership. These aren't just editorial choices, they are deliberate signals about what kind of leadership is being projected and what public behavior is being normalized. Step 4, discussion prompts. Once students have compared the language and imagery, bring them together for discussion. This is more of a two-parter. Step 5 is their own personal reflection, but I always find that discussing with students bring ideas to the forefront and get them to really acknowledge certain things that they may not have realized, or things as the professor you might not have realized. So potential questions to look at. How do headlines and visuals shape emotional response? What are the political stakes of these narratives? Which sources seem objective and which feel like propaganda? And both can, and it can, they can be both at the same time. How might these narratives influence international trust, blame, or cooperation? The goal ultimately is not to arrive at a single answer, but to encourage nuance, critical dialogue, and reflection. This is my favorite part, and this is probably my favorite part of most assignments that I do, reflection assignments. I think that reflection deepens learning. It invites students to think about their own biases, emotional reactions, and cultural assumptions. We want to ask them to connect what they've observed to broader themes. How does power shape narrative? How do values shape information priorities? How do national identities emerge through crisis storytelling? You can assign reflection papers, presentations, or even group presentations. The key is to promote metacognition and synthesis across disciplines. I will be sharing this PowerPoint, and I have a list of 20 other potential prompts for reflection assignments as well, just in case. One of my favorite things is to introduce fact-checking sites to spot misinformation, right? So I want to shift now from narrative analysis to verification tools. One of the most accessible ways to counter misinformation is by using fact-checking sites. Websites like Snopes, PolitiFact, and BBC Verify played a crucial role during the pandemic. They debunked myths about vaccines, death rates, and treatments. These tools allow students to cross-check claims and understand how misinformation is detected and corrected. It's not just about proving something wrong. It's about building habits of skepticism, healthy skepticism, not a skepticism where everything is false, nothing can be trusted, but healthy skepticism, verification, and responsible sharing. Fact check versus fake news. It's important to distinguish between intentional disinformation and simply false or misleading content. Fake news is often emotionally charged and politically weaponized. Fact checking, on the other hand, is methodical, evidence based, and transparent. Teaching students to recognize this difference empowers them to push back against sensationalism and to seek out perhaps not objective or absolute truth, but truth of our time, I guess, and amid the noise. What I like about this assignment is because it really brings to the front framing and spin, which are tools of modern persuasion. Not all manipulation involves lies. Sometimes the truth is just spun. Strategic framing uses selective facts, emotive language, and compelling visuals to shape how we interpret reality. Examples could potentially include selective statistics. Unemployment dropped 2%, but from what starting point? Emotive language like job-killing tax hikes versus essential revenue adjustments. Visual cues, color schemes, facial expressions, lighting, and symbolism. We want students to learn not just what is being said, but how and why it's being presented in a certain way or in certain ways. Here's the strategic message flowchart. This flowchart helps break down how a strategic message is constructed. It starts with an intent: persuade, rally, distract. From there, the message is built through framing the issue in a specific light, selecting evidence to support that frame, omitting conflicting or complicating data, using language and imagery to evoke desired reactions. Students should regularly ask, what's the communicator trying to achieve? What's left out, and how is this message designed to influence me emotionally or cognitively? Learning outcomes. At this point, students should be able to evaluate information using both source credibility and geopolitical context, recognize international and cultural bias in media coverage, think critically about how global narratives are constructed and whose voices are prioritized. Connect cross-cultural literacy with informed civic participation. These skills, I believe, are absolutely vital, not just for academics or for the university life, but for navigating complex real-world issues and creating responsible citizens, digitally literate citizens. Now, for me, this particular compelling point is why international relations informed information literacy matters across disciplines. Information is global. I mean, we live in the age of information. It's commodified, it's capitalized, it defines our life. Whether you're studying public health, business, journalism, or environmental science, you are engaging with narratives shaped by global actors. Understanding IR concepts gives students the tools to analyze pandemic messaging and its public health impact. Working at a medical school for the past 2 years, you really see how the message matters. It helps you understand how environmental reporting reflects national priorities, detects bias in international journalism, and it navigates cultural narratives in global marketing and communications. Global literacy, in my opinion, isn't just a niche skill. It's essential for critical engagement in every professional and academic field. It helps navigating sensitive topics with care. This work will often involve sensitive and emotionally charged topics like politics, race, identity, and international conflict. And that's why it's so important to create an inclusive and respectful learning environment. Here are some strategies. It helps create dialogue, not division. It encourages open-ended questions and curiosity in a safe space. It helps normalize discomfort. It lets students know that it's okay to feel challenged, and this is where deep learning happens. Hopefully use neutral framing. The goal is to avoid inflammatory language when presenting controversial topics, but we have to present controversial topics nonetheless. And it helps balance critique with cultural awareness, recognizing diverse perspectives without making any assumptions, or at least, opening the field to recognizing diverse perspectives and engaging in that. The emancipatory potential of that is essential. The goal is to model respectful engagement and prepare students to think critically without shutting down conversation. Now, in the interest of going through and not running out of time, I have included two of my favorite things to study or show students, the SIFT method, and I'll just move past that, as well as the CRAP test. Um, so to get to my penultimate slide, framing, power, and literacy, the final reflections of this assignment and the goal of this assignment. Teaching information literacy through the lens of IR helps students see that global context sharpens local awareness, right? There's nothing that happens at the global level that's not going to affect us at the local level, and vice versa in so many ways. What we see in our news feeds reflects international influences. IR concepts reveal the politics behind the message. Soft power, national interest, and propaganda all play roles in how stories are shaped, and they come to define our lives. Students ultimately will gain transferable skills in evaluation, cultural awareness, and reflective thinking, skills they'll use in their studies, careers, and beyond. Questions and discussions. Thank you for being part of the session. I'd love to open it up to your thoughts. How might this approach fit into your own teaching? What challenges do you see in helping students evaluate cross-border narratives? Do you have examples from your own classroom or research that connect with today's ideas? Is there anything that you think is just not possible? Because I believe this is an ongoing conversation, and I have so much to learn myself about this, even though I love this topic. So thank you.
I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but I have a question myself for you.
Perfect.
Um, when you teach international students in your classes, have they had specific responses to this information or to this framing of these cultural differences and cultural disparities?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, I've had a mixture because FIU had a very international, it was a minority serving institution, or it's a minority serving institution, largely Hispanic, but that wasn't just Cubans, that was Argentinians, Brazilians. So you had this wide array. But we also had this very interesting 2x2 program with China, where we had students come over from China and do 2 years with us. And they had to take my writing class. And one of the things I noticed about the students is that we really had to promote copyright with them, and they just didn't understand. They didn't cite because they were never taught to cite. And that wasn't more a reflection, it's just part of the culture there. And so we had to kind of not accommodate that, but really emphasize that, okay, you might not have to cite everything when you're back in China, but here for your grade, you definitely have to do that. So, and it was a learning experience as to why large chunks of text would be taken and plopped into the middle, or ideas would not be cited, because that's a cultural thing there. Like that wasn't an issue, and it was something that they had to adapt to when they came here. And something I had to adapt because I had a lot of students in this program. And so I had to change, or at least adapt, how I approach this with students. There's also differences in having an Argentinian student and having a Brazilian student because of their Portuguese background versus a Spanish background, and the kind of nuances that go into that. Or how different it is for Spanish speakers in the Caribbean as opposed to South America. Um, I've only actually worked with a diverse student body, being at FIU and then at Morehouse School of Medicine. Um, so it's always felt like an engaging, inclusive environment. And so students were really receptive to that. I would say my students are much more compassionate And that was even when I started 13 years ago, more willing to learn ideas or open to ideas and not so set in their ways. And I don't think it had anything to do with them being young, right? Where you're more open and receptive to things. I just think it's a generational thing. What concerned me though was their complete distrust in information. And I'm all about challenging authority. However, the idea that nothing was real or legitimate really started to bother me as things progressed and then the pandemic happened.
Well, thank you for that answer. We've got some praise for you in the chat, but no other questions. So I think that we will move on to the next section. Thank you for that presentation, Melissa. That was really amazing.
Thank you. And if anyone has any questions after, or I'll have my email as well, and you can have access to any of my learning materials if you ever need it, or my PowerPoint as well.
Thank you. So next we have our first lightning talk with Sharika Garner, Better Together, Embedding Media Literacy into Academic Courses. So I'm going to turn it over to Sharika now. Take it away.
Great, thanks everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Melissa, thank you for that great presentation. I was getting some ideas about how I can incorporate your concepts into my presentation or my media course as well. So are you seeing my screen?
I am seeing presenter mode on your screen.
Of course
I
you
don't know
are.
if you want us to see all behind the curtain, but that's what we were getting.
Okay, let's try again. Here we go. How about that?
I think that's what you wanted us to see, and that's what we're seeing, is just the
Okay.
slide.
Awesome, thank you. So my name is Sharika Garner. I am the Digital Learning and Engagement Librarian at the University of Central Florida. And I'm just going to talk to you briefly about how we have worked to embed media literacy into our academic courses. So a little bit of context about the University of Central Florida. We are the largest university in Florida. We are a public institution. Our enrollment is about 70,000 students, and we have a pre-existing suite of asynchronous information literacy modules that go back to 2008. So you can see what topics we have over on the right. Our information literacy modules are currently housed within our learning management system. So they live in Canvas, which is where students are already engaging with their course materials, or if they're an online student, that's where they're taking their classes. And there are a couple of different ways that you can access these information literacy modules. The first one is you can enroll yourself. We have these links to these information literacy modules on our library website, and we've recently incorporated them into our university-wide Student Success Hub. And so if you are a student who is struggling and you think that you would benefit from taking one of these modules, you are welcome to do that without any instructor guidance towards these. They are also used for topic remediation. So if you are taking a course and maybe you're struggling with citing sources and you don't have time to meet with a librarian, you can take these courses kind of to hone your skills in that. Or if your professor sees that you're struggling, a lot of them know that these resources are available, and so they may assign them to you in that way. And then the final way that students kind of access these courses, it's probably our most popular, is that they are assigned by our faculty. And so because this relationship dates back so far, we have a lot of faculty who know that these courses exist, know that students are coming to our university with these deficits, and are assigning them within the first week or at some point during their coursework. So this is our timeline for developing this course. We did a needs assessment, some curriculum mapping, instructional design, assessment and planning. We are currently in the pilot testing phase, and then we will move to implementation this fall. So in step one, in theory, what you would want to do if you are interested in developing one of these courses of your own, you want to survey students and faculty to find out what the information and skills gaps are. our topics that we offer are very defined for what we have seen, one, students need, and two, what faculty are asking for. And then you want to make sure you define clear, measurable course goals. And then, of course, making sure those goals are aligned with our university outcomes and digital literacy frameworks, depending on what type of institution you are working in. So what we did at UCF is I met with liaison librarians and our associate deans, and I just kind of asked them, what are you seeing? What are your faculty saying that they would like assistance with? What are your research consultations looking like? So how can I help you better serve students? And out of those conversations and those surveys, I determined two priority needs. So one, we needed an AI course, and two, we needed a media literacy course that would be a little more comprehensive and cover misinformation, disinformation, and things of that sort. So step two, if you were developing something at your institution, is you just want to make sure you're setting objectives, maybe using Bloom's taxonomy if you have another academic framework that you would like to use that's relevant. And then just making sure that your instructional materials are diverse and relevant. And then you want to organize those modules into thematic modules that students can progress through naturally. There's no barriers to accessing the information. So I established the learning objectives that you see on the right. And so those are our learning objectives for our media literacy module. And then I developed our content into 3 smaller modules within the large asynchronous course, which is going to be navigating truth in the digital age, media influence and the misinformation ecosystem, and then ethical media creation and digital citizenship. Then you want to make sure that your module is instructionally sound and that students, like I said, are not exhibiting any barriers to accessing the information. The purpose of the course is for it to be a resource and not to be challenging in terms of access. We obviously want the academic information and content to be challenging, but we want to make sure students are moving through as seamlessly as possible. And so for our course, we have text-based content, videos that have the transcripts embedded in them so that you can either watch the video or access the transcript. We have learning widgets, and then we've also incorporated discussion boards. For step 4, obviously we want to have some sort of assessment. We have done both summative assessments and formative assessments. You can do what works best for your institution. I am not grading the work within this module daily or even weekly on a consistent basis. And so it's really important that students are able to receive timely feedback. And so for us, we have a summative assessment at the end of each module. So it's just one reflection question. We use the information from the reflection question to kind of guide where our module may go next. And it's just a chance for students to stop and think about the content. And then at the end, we have a formative assessment. And so that's something that's automatically graded. Students must score an 80% or higher on the quiz for credit. And then we just have 10 quick questions of varying types. So multiple choice, true and false, matching, drop down, all kinds of questions for students to engage with. As I mentioned, right now we are in step 5, so we are in pilot testing. The best people to use for testing, I think, are students. And so we have some students who work in our department, and our students have been asked to evaluate the course on learning outcomes. So are you learning these things? Are these things that you think that you need to learn? How are you connecting the content to these outcomes? We are also evaluating their completion time. So we want the course to take 20 to 30 minutes to complete. So do we have enough information? Do we have an overload of information? How do you think that we're doing in that area? And then also the relevance of the materials. So I mentioned earlier that you want to make sure you have relevant and diverse instructional content. And so I'm asking them, because they will be the consumers of this information, do you think the materials are relevant? Is this something that has absolutely no connection to your personal life or your academic journey? And then in the fall, we are moving to our final phase, which is we are going to implement the course. This process that I've discussed today is cyclical. So we're on step 6 in the fall, but we are going to go back and continue to reevaluate. So during intersession, in December, in May, and then again in August, we will review the content and make minor changes, especially because the material is going to discuss real world events. If something significant has changed, we will make sure that we are either editing that or removing it from the course if it's no longer applicable. And then we do our major reevaluation in the summer. Okay, and now I would like to open it up to questions if you all have any questions.
I'm not seeing any in the chat, but you were right to anticipate the ways in which you could combine what you're doing with what Melissa's doing. I know I'm sitting here, brains going. Just going to leave it open for just one more second if anybody has any questions. All right, then we will move on to our next presentation. Thank you for that, Sharika. That was really great. Our second presentation is going to be Jennifer Joe, Class Size Matters, Prepping and Planning for Low Attendance, Low Engagement, and Other Teaching Problems. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer Joe. And first, let me introduce myself because that's how I start everything. I'm the undergraduate engagement librarian at the University of Toledo. I have a very similar title to Sharika. I'm the liaison to anthropology, sociology, and women and gender studies, which you may note that are small departments. Most places they're small departments. In fact, ours are downsizing even more as we speak. I do pick up extra English composition classes and others as asked. And I teach a credit-bearing class. That is one of the big things that I think makes my experiences stand out a little bit, is that I do teach a credit-bearing class. It is 3 credit hours. I've had anywhere from 2 students enrolled to 26 students enrolled in the 6 years that I have been teaching it. And honestly, all of the classes I teach, they're wildly different class sizes between the liaison areas and other classes, because when you pick up an English composition class, it's going to be packed as full as that room can hold. Which luckily for us, we try to keep it between 25 and 30. Mostly because our buildings can't hold much more than that, at least the ones that we hold English classes in. All right, so we're talking about problems today. You walk into a class that typically has 20 to 25 students. You're expecting a full English composition class, and only 10 have attended that day. What do you do? This has happened to me countless times in my career. In fact, it's happened to me in my credit-bearing class. I have had times where only half of my students have shown up, and I go, okay, I'm going to have to completely rethink what I'm doing here. I like to do a lot of active learning. My credit bearing class does require quite a bit of lecture just because of the nature of the class, but I try to do as much active learning as I can. So walking into half the class being there and the rest of them not, it can be a little daunting. So what have I done? What have I done? First of all, the class tends to become a workshop. It can involve the students more hands-on on the topic. I can tell them, look, since we've got such few students, let's everybody move up to the classroom. We can talk like one-on-one. Sometimes the instructor of record does not particularly like that I move people around, but we get over that pretty easily. Either I'll have them work together to solve a problem, depending on what the professor has asked me to do. For an English comp class, usually they are looking for research for their final papers. Our English comp actually has 2 different papers, and usually I come in for the argumentative one. So have them work together to make an argument about something that hopefully nobody else in the class is already doing for their paper, because I don't want to give them any extra help. But we can do that. Or we can work separately to race to an answer. And that can be a little bit more fun. We can set a timer and be like, okay, I need you to find a source about this topic, and it needs to be scholarly and et cetera, et cetera. Who can do it the fastest? On the other hand, sometimes I am married to a lecture. My English composition professors usually let me have pretty free reign, but I do have a script that I follow so that it is comparable to the lecturer who usually does English composition. Her name is Elaine Reeves. She's great at it, and I don't want to be straying too far from her. So I instead get students involved a little bit by asking what they think that their fellow students might want to know. Once you've been in a classroom for 3 or 4 weeks, you do make friends. They may not be the closest friends. You're not going to hang out with them. You're not going to go to parties with them, but you'll ask them for notes, or you'll like talk to them in like the moments in between lecture or whatever. And so I ask, okay, you guys know who are missing. I don't know any of you. What do you think your fellow students might want to know that I'm leaving out, or that you are worried that I'll leave out? And so they'll give me some questions, and I will try to answer them. And hopefully they then pass the answers on to those students once they get to talk to them again, or I'll have the professor pass it on. Okay, so we've got that. But what happens when you have a full class and no one's talking? This is probably the number one scenario that I have in my credit bearing class, where they're just tired. I have my class set at 9:30. They shouldn't be tired, but they are still sometimes shuffling in pajamas, seeing a couple of people wear slippers, that sort of thing. Can't do that for very long. I'm up north. We get snow and nasty weather, so it doesn't happen for very long. But the first couple of sessions, they can be kind of reluctant to talk. So what are you going to do about that? Like, lecturing at people has never been my strong suit. I'm I'm sitting here almost wanting to have you guys talk to me right now. But so I want to make sure that like they are engaged even if they're not energetic. So, what have I done? This one is really easy for me to do in the credit bearing class, but I have started to do it in my one-shot lectures as well. I want to know what the students expect from the class. Sometimes, especially with my credit bearing class, and excuse me, I do need a drink real quick. Sometimes with my credit bearing class, they have been put in the class without knowing what the class is. So asking students what they expect from the class is a question that I ask on the first day. Yes, syllabus day, usually students get out early. We end up having a 15-20 minute discussion about what they expect from the class and what they want to get out of it, because I want to make sure that they're getting their money's worth. In my one-shot classes, I will ask them if their professor has given them any indication of what is going to be going on in the class, and some of them have. My anthropology classes, they have a worksheet. English composition, you kind of expect, you know what to expect. Like, it is the English composition lecture. But I have another class that I teach that I'll be talking about throughout this presentation called Multicultural Toledo, which is an honors class. And those students are studying the different cultures within Toledo. Toledo is quite the melting pot. Don't know if any of you are MASH fans, but we've got Jamie Farr, and we've got the Hungarians with Tony Paco, and we've got Italians, and we've got Greeks. We've got a melting pot. And we also have these like neighborhoods that have like cutesy names. And so the students are studying the different neighborhoods and seeing what makes up Toledo. they don't always know what I'm supposed to be doing for them. The professor knows. The professor and I have worked for 5 years now on this class, so she knows, but they don't. So I always ask them, okay, what is a thing that you are struggling to find? What is the thing that you really want to know about the library? What is the thing that I can help you with as a librarian? And that gets them to sort of trust me a little bit more, that I'm not just some guest lecturer coming in with my own agenda. And it also gets them to open up a little more. And it usually doesn't take too much time, because if you stare at them long enough, somebody will open their mouth. And I only need one or two people to suggest something before we can move on. I try to come up with at least one question I can answer for them, regardless of my lesson plan. Sometimes we answer multiple questions, and that's even better, because I think that gets word of mouth a little bit. Like, she answered all of my questions, even though it wasn't in her lecture plan. Another thing I do for engagement is to create competition between the students. This also works very well with Multicultural Toledo, although sometimes they say it's unfair because they are working on different neighborhoods. But one of the big things we talk about in that class is the census. And so they have to find the census tracts for the classes, for the neighborhoods that they're part of. And that can be a little bit difficult because census tracts are not the same as neighborhoods. But if I'm sensing a little bit of like reluctance to be working, I who can come up with their census tracts the fastest? Simple thing, but it gets them a little bit more engaged and actually focused on work instead of like lollygagging and waiting until the timer is up. This can be done for individuals, pairs, groups. In Multicultural Toledo, it is groups because they are already broken into groups for their project. And then the last thing I do, this is kind of a last resort, just because I am a fairly private person. But if they are really like not responding to me, I will tell them stories about my life as an academic, stories about me from undergrad, grad school. I will tell them about all of my foibles and the things that got me in trouble in school. I especially like to talk about this in the context of interlibrary loan and requesting things. I ask everybody who's a procrastinator. Nobody wants to admit it. I tell them about how I'm still a procrastinator. I will confess to you right now, I was finishing this slideshow this morning. It was only one thing, and I will even tell you which screen it is when we get to that screen, but I was finishing it this morning. So I open up, and that usually gets them to at least like pay more attention to me and get a little bit more like buy-in to what I'm saying. I was them once. I still am them in some ways, depending on how I'm feeling and that sort of thing. So I talked a lot about lesson plans. And that is because they have truly saved my life and my career. I knew no one who ever made a real lesson plan when I first started my first library job. It was back in 2013. I hadn't heard of anybody doing a lesson plan. Maybe they might scribble a few notes. But in 2015, I was a campus librarian, which means I was the singular librarian on campus. I had a part-time staffer, and I got pregnant. So I was going on maternity leave. And while I tried to make sure that all of my classes were done either before or after maternity leave, I didn't want to leave everyone hanging if I had to go early or I had to take more maternity leave than I thought I was going to need. So I started making lesson plans. I would write down everything. These days, I don't write down everything because I don't expect there to be somebody coming up following me who's going to have to follow it. But I create a plan for the class, keeping in mind potential problems, the low attendance thing, the low engagement. I make little notes in the margin about what to do, especially if it's one of those classes that I've taught repeatedly, what's worked before, what hasn't worked before. I build in alternatives to what I'm going to be doing. If a group activity requires groups of like 3 or 4 people and I show up and there's 10 people, I'm not going to just split the class in half. I'm going to do something else. I also make high tech and low tech versions of my class because I have run into tech trouble. We all have. I mean, we had 2 different AV checks for this presentation just to make sure that we wouldn't run into tech trouble here. So I do build in low tech and high tech versions. The lesson plans don't need to be elaborate. Like I said, I used to write every little thing down, but that was because I was expecting that my part-time staffer or a librarian from another campus was going to have to step in and take over the lesson. But I don't do that so much anymore. Not even for my credit bearing classes. They help keep you on track and they help with time blocking. That's one of the things I really struggled with when I first started teaching was if I didn't have that engagement, if I didn't have that number of students, how was I going to fill this time? Was I going to add things that the instructor didn't really care about? Or was I going to just leave early? I do tend to block out about 10 minutes at the end of class for instructors to be able to give their students any like directives or whatever so that I'm not the reason that they're kept over time. I know everybody's very busy and we have a very large campus that can be kind of hard to get back and forth on. This is the slide that I added this morning. This is actually a picture of the lesson plan layout that I created. As you can see, it's very simple. It has the class and the date and the time. It has class objectives. So I will look at their syllabus or I will talk to the professor about what do they expect? What does the professor expect from me? What am I supposed to be giving this class that the instructor of record can't? And then I will match it to library objectives. I typically use the framework, though there are some specific objectives that we have as our mission statement and in our strategic plan that I will sometimes add. And then there are subtopics, everything I need to go through, what I need to do to prep. That's usually where I will write my notes of if I walk in and there's half the students I expect, what am I going to do? Place for me to plan the activities, online sources I'm going to use, library books, which I don't really use so much anymore, but every once in a while there'll be something that is pertinent that I'll want to remember to tell them about. And then there's a nice big notes field. Like I said, it is not elaborate at all. I whipped it up in Word really fast one day when I realized just how many classes I was trying to fit into that small time frame. And I've been using it ever since. So that was 2015. I've been using it for almost 10 years now. All right. There are other problems, though, with teaching. Sometimes it feels like there are nothing but problems with teaching, but we can fix them. One of them is communications with students after class. So even in my subject areas, I will probably never see a student again unless they happen to be enrolled in another class that an instructor asks me to come to. In anthropology and sociology, that does happen because we have 2 prose seminars, and so I get invited to both prose seminars. But they don't have to take them on any specific time frame, so there could be several years in between me seeing them again. So how do I deal with this? I give them my contact information. That's like, it seems like a no-brainer, but I cannot even begin to tell you the number of times I've sat in on other librarians' lectures and they don't have their contact information in the PowerPoint. They don't mention how to contact them. We're going through some construction in our library right now, and we actually have to give some pretty in-depth instructions on how to get to our offices. I don't know if my fellow librarians are doing that yet. I certainly hope they are, but I do that. My door is covered in rainbows. I have our LGBTQ plus poster up. I have a safe space rainbow. I have a lot of rainbows. So I'm very easy to find if you can get to the row of doors. But that's what I always tell students is to look for the rainbow. And then the other thing is rapport with instructor. This can be very hard, especially if it's a new instructor. English composition does give me kind of pause with this. Luckily, English composition is also one of my most structured classes. So usually I don't need to communicate with students after class because we've gone through the same lesson plan that I always use, the one that I've borrowed from Elaine. But having at least a decent line of communication with the instructor is really vital. In case you miss anything or in case students have questions, I always tell them that if they are not comfortable contacting me directly for whatever reason, they can ask their professor to send me an email. And then the other thing is inconsistency between classes. Back to that multicultural Toledo class, there are 4 sections of that class. I am not good enough to say every single thing in every single class every single time. And I know this. The instructor of record, bless her heart, also knows this. I relied very heavily on my lesson plan for this class because they are working with the census. And it can be a little confusing if you don't go through all the steps correctly. They also need to find a lot of information about their areas. So I try really, really hard to make sure that I hit every point. And I also write some reflection notes after the session. I don't do that for one-shot classes where I'm not going to be teaching the same class again, like in my subject areas. But for this class, and usually for my English composition classes, I write some reflection notes after the session because that helps jog my memory. Did I forget something? Did I skip something? Did I misstate something? And then I communicate with the professor after. Be like, hey, I said this thing, I misspoke, it's actually this thing. Can you let your students know? Obviously, I have no way of knowing if the professor actually tells the students that or not, but I've at least done my due diligence to follow up on. So those are all the problems I have had. Well, not all the problems, all of the common problems I have had in teaching. Does anybody have any questions or comments? And as you can see, I do have my contact information on the screen because this is slightly like teaching.
Pretty close to it. Thank you so much for your presentation. I will say, like, I am 100% a procrastinator. I don't know if I'll ever grow out of it. I highly doubt it at this point. But my biggest fear is just walking into a classroom, only half the people are there, and then they're just dead silent the whole time. And then I start to ramble. It's terrifying. But yeah, if there aren't any questions in the chat, we can go ahead and move on to Missy. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for your presentation, and her slides will be available after the forum. I don't know why I blanked on it. The slides will be available, and of course, you saw her contact information at the end of it. And let's go ahead and go to Missy.
Thank you. Just a second, working on the sharing. There we go. Sorry, it's been working all morning and then suddenly. So, welcome. My presentation is on intellectual property literacy, going beyond copyright. And let's see. And because I talk so much about patents and trademarks, there's the disclaimer. We do not give any legal advice. Any information here is purely for educational and informational purposes. So what I'd like to talk about in my 5 to 10 minutes is, why is intellectual property important? How is it addressed in the framework? How I have worked on finding my audience and engaging them, and some things that I've learned. So why is this any of my business? Well, I'm the representative for UCOP's Patent and Trademark Resource Center. The PTRC program is a network of about 100, I think it's now slightly over 100 public and state and academic libraries throughout the US. And we contract with the USPTO to provide the public with patent and trademark information. And so I support the inventor and entrepreneurial community, not only on the UCF campus, but throughout Central Florida. So why is this important outside of the fact that it's simply my job? Well, there are 2 surveys that I found. One, it was a global survey of students from 2021. 11% of them already ran their own business. 18% wanted to become entrepreneurs right after graduation, and another 32% wanted to transition into some form of entrepreneurship within 5 years. Another survey 2 years later found that 50% of everyone in Gen Z surveyed aspired to be entrepreneurs. So while it's all fine and good that we're teaching, how to cite things in APA format and, write, academic papers, 50 to 60% of students wish to pursue something where they're going to have to know how to establish and protect their own branding. Now, I did not play the whole thing because I only have 5 to 10 minutes, but as an illustration of intellectual property and things that people need to know, I thought I would start off with a little quiz. Now, feel free to engage if you don't. If you don't, that's fine. But what kind of intellectual property did I just play on the previous slide? Was it trademark, copyright, patent? It could be 2, it could be 3. If you'd like to participate, go ahead and scan the QR code and join right in, and we can kind of see what people think about the flourish and fanfare that I just did on the other side. So hopefully it's working. We have one for copyright, trademark, and copyright. I'll just leave it open for another 30 seconds because don't want it taking too long. We have a tie. Anyone else? Copyright. Okay, so since I can't stand the sound of silence, I'm going to go ahead and reveal the correct answer. So the correct answer is trademark and copyright. So let me do my high-tech thing of moving my Mentimeter off to one side. So were I to do this demonstration in class, I would go into the USPTO trademark search and do my fancy field tag search, looking up 20th Century Fox as the owner and looking up non-visual marks, and show that indeed 20th Century Fox has several sensory marks. You can go into the trademark status and document retrieval and see that it is indeed a trademark. It's live, registered, issued, and active. The full description, along with the percussive bass of field drums and timpani and piatti and such. So, but if you go further, there's a tab for documents, and this will be every document that was exchanged between the trademark examiner and the applicant. Among those is this little application data, with a line that says the applicant submits the attached musical score sheet to supplement or clarify the description. And lo and behold, Mr. Alfred Newman's 20th Century Fox trademark was copyrighted in 1956, renewed, and then assigned in 1996 to TCF. So for those of you who answered copyright and trademark, or copyright or trademark, you were both right. So in this short exercise, we saw a lot of things. One single artifact can be multiple types of intellectual property. Information has value. It can be bought, traded, licensed. Some types can be renewed. And trademarks can be more than simply a word, a phrase, or a logo. They can be different types of sensory marks. And most of this information, as I teach people all the time, is online and it's free to access to anyone. But sometimes it does require specialized language or search language to discover it. So what does the framework for information literacy have to say about that? So authority is constructed and contextual. In practice, students should acknowledge they're developing their own voice. What it says about IP is that they must respect IP. Under information has value in the discussion where students will struggle to understand the diverse values of information in an environment where free information and related services are plentiful. The concept of intellectual property is first encountered through rules of citation or warnings about plagiarism and copyright law. And intellectual property is a legal and social construct. So in how the framework talks about intellectual property, well, it has to be respected. It has rules, warnings, it's legal. It sounds sort of intimidating and not very inviting. Now, by the numbers, intellectual property is mentioned 4 times. 2 of those are copyright, and the word patent and trademark appeared nowhere throughout. For that, one needs to go to the companion document to the framework for STEM. Again, has theoretical, practical knowledge of intellectual property and copyright. Articulate the purpose and distinguishing characteristics of copyright, fair use, open access. At least public domain does kind of cross over into patents a little bit. Recognize that although peer-reviewed articles are the dominant format, patents are one of many that may result from a single research project. So the way in which it's talked about here is patents as a product of research, not something that could actually be used as a primary source, as I'm often showing people. And patents and chemical compounds used as an example of information that may require understanding, organization, and search language, such as I demonstrated earlier. So this is, so you can now tell that I'm a patent and trademark warrior, getting out there trying to educate people on the importance of that. And how have I done that in the past, finding my audience? It has been lots of programming, lots of events. So there's a startup festival that is held at UCF every year, and I table here is me tabling with our business librarian men, and we kind of split it between IP and business resources. We've had events. This is our IEEE event. We also had a whole entrepreneurship event that a series of events that I held with our business and science librarians. And I do lots of workshops, although not very many, because no matter how many pretty advertisements I have up, usually I can count the attendees on one hand. So I started thinking about getting into the classroom. How did I start getting into the classroom? It was completely an accident. It was COVID, fall of 2020. I am sitting where most people were in 2020, working at my dining room table. And our science librarian said, this person wants me to discuss how to find patents. And, can you go ahead and teach me? And although I did, I said, all I need is a link and I can jump into the class. So, so she talked it over the professor. She taught 40 minutes of science librarianship using SciFinder, creating an EndNote library. And I talked about intellectual property. And it was very popular and has continued for the past 5-6 years. So then I started thinking, well, this is great. I mean, I had a wonderful audience, a classroom full of people. I never have that during my workshops. How can I do more of this? So through the science librarian, also became involved with the biology department, the engineering librarian. I could do outreach to all the different engineerings, computer science. I work frequently with our business librarian, attending marketing and entrepreneurship classes. Other classes that I've spoken to in the past are legal studies and, believe it or not, graphic design. I had a trademark professional come and speak to graphic design courses about what they need to know about copyright and trademark in order to serve their clients. So when talking about patents and trademarks, trying to find ways to make it exciting. So sometimes I'll go into the different elements of a patent. So you can see here, you've got author, title, abstract, citations, and sometimes I'll use this illustration as a way to show that patents are not that scary. They're not so much unlike scholarly articles. And if they still think it's intimidating, I will point out that this particular illustration is from a Brownie Scout guide to getting an entrepreneurship patch. So this explanation is intended for K through 5th grade. The other thing is bringing in manipulatives and showing patents for things that people are very familiar with, such as I have my own rainbow colored slinky that I will take to classes, my floppy filaments, my koosh ball. And that's for patents. For trademarks, you could grab just about anything in your office. You'd be amazed at how many trademarked items there are around you. I'm looking at 20 right now. So in our entrepreneurship classes, I find that these are like new venture classes. And so they have to come up with a business idea and then pursue it. So they already have an idea in mind. It's not like speaking to a class where it's all theoretical. They already have something that they're working on. And having them work through the USPTO's quick 6-question IP identifier, the questions are extremely leading, which is great because you already kind of know, oh, brand name slogan, this is probably having something to do with trademarks. And then at the end, you get your responses, your results, and those can be exported and saved. And so they have something to reflect on later. So through the sciences, through the different optics classes and biological research methods, I've spoken to over 150 students in the past 5 years. In contrast, I've spoken to more students over a single year, just hitting our extremely popular entrepreneurship classes. What has been working is that the co-teaching is a great way to learn what my colleagues are doing, not only seeing some of their teaching styles and mannerisms and techniques, but also we don't have like a true old-fashioned reference desk anymore where you're constantly working with all the different students from all the different backgrounds. And so you get a little bit rusty on some of the databases. I am an anthropology and psychology librarian, so I don't use SciFinder every day. I don't do, looking at market shares. And so being there and looking at how they're using the databases, seeing what's new with the databases has been great. It also helps to introduce students to this concept that librarians have subject specializations. Your students often will walk into the library and think that the first person they talk to is going to know just as much as like the person like 2 or 3 doors down. And knowing that there's like IP specialist, there's a business specialist, there's a science specialist, helps them to understand to seek out the right person. And it keeps me updating and modernizing my material because the USPTO trains me yearly on how to perform patent searches and trademark searches. But when it comes to teaching the concepts, there's so much more than that. Things that need some work are that I'm currently kind of pigeonholed with the other librarians. So For instance, my optics class, he has someone from technology transfer come 2 months after the library class to speak about patents and licensing. And I've spoken to him and said, it would make a lot of sense for me to come in as the same day as the tech transfer since we're talking about the same concept. And he said, no, I have library day and that's technology transfer day. So sometimes, putting yourself along, with your fellow librarians does not always work when you're talking about such greatly differing material. And that's my second option. So within one class, say for instance, if I'm going speaking with the entrepreneurship class, I will talk about basic intellectual property concepts for 20-25 minutes. And then Min will go into mapping and finding and manipulating market data. It's a lot of information and they're not particularly related. And so there's not any kind of scaffolding that's happening during the class. They're getting exposed to a lot of material, but you wonder whether retention is an issue. And the last thing that I've run into is that the feedback we're getting is not terribly good because our feedback form has you choose the instructor from your drop-down box. And so the feedback, sometimes it's hard to determine which one of us that they're talking about. So a few things that I'm working on is doing a little bit of flipped classroom work for better retention, finding videos and tutorials that I can have the students run through pre-assessment, perhaps the IP identifier, for them to do that before I even come into the class, so that what I'm doing is a refresher and it isn't first time information. And also having handouts and slides for afterwards. And working on an assessment tool for our co-teaching. Current form only names one instructor, so just coming up with a secondary option. And I didn't add it to this slide. I thought I did, but also instead of working with the librarian to co-teach the class for the professor, working with the professor to say, where is it most logical for me to come into this and introduce these concepts. The students, the feedback so far has been pretty positive, definitely positive from the professors. And so looking for ways to continue it. If you have any questions, happy to take them. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Missy. You said that you take a workshop every year to figure out how to research patents?
So the PTRC representatives have it's a week-long seminar that's in Alexandria. So for a while there, it was every spring I would spend a week in at the US Patent Office doing training and seminars and such. Recent years, they've been virtual because they had to go virtual soon after COVID. And so they realized that it was easier for a lot of people to not have to do that long travel and staying away for a week. But yeah, PTRC librarians have that 1 week of training yearly and then keep updated with various seminars and webinars.
Very cool. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to put in the chat? You can also click the raise your hand button and I can allow you to speak. You should be good to go, Brandy.
Hey, this is Brandy Brabante. I was wondering, kind of opposite of what you do, you say you go co-teach with other librarians and you learn a lot. Well, I've learned a lot from your presentation, so I was wondering, for those of us who don't have someone like you, that we could bring in, what are some good places that we could go to get this type of information to help our patrons who do have questions about patents and copyrights and things like that?
Oh, boy, I wish I'd put in some more slides. So, so the US Patent Office website can be horribly confusing, but let me, but they have some pages that are geared towards inventors and entrepreneurs. Let me see if I can actually, for some reason, I can't find an open web page to save my life. So let me see. There's so much information, but under learning and resources, a lot of this that is for inventors, entrepreneurs, can be really useful because it will be, here are patent basics, here are trademark basics. Oh, share. Okay. I am screen sharing. Which screen? Yes. So, right. So through the USPTO, there are, and I wouldn't really recommend the one that says researchers and librarians, because that's actually just pretty much referring you to the librarians. But no matter what state you're in, even if there's not a PTRC in that state, there's a PTRC that serves that state. And so if you were to go to here, you can see who there would be near you. I know there's several in Louisiana. They're not in New Orleans, but you've got like a couple in Louisiana. Oh, there's a third in Mississippi. 3 here. They've put a lot of work into expanding the program, and so and outreach is kind of our game. So yeah, if you can't find somebody, ask me. I will be happy to find somebody for you, because there's someone in your state or somebody who serves you.
Thank you so much for that. All right, before I let you all go for the day, I will say that the recording for today will be available tomorrow on YouTube, as long as I can be held accountable. Um, and so will the slides. They will be attached to our webpage, so you can just head to nolailc.org. And once again, I'm going to post our feedback form into the chat, so you can go and give us some great feedback for our presenters today. Each of our presenters have their own section on the form, and please don't hesitate to let us know what you'd like to see from us in the future. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.